used to hitchhike with me to San Diego State every day. And this is the late 60s, early 70s. Dogs on campus. Toby never needed a leash, the smartest dog ever. He'd go to class with me and lay there, and go to the next class with me and lay there. And then we'd hitchhike home. It was pretty awesome. Yeah.
Welcome in to Menfolk Journeys, the podcast of great conversations with men. I'm your host, Chris Foster, and we're going to explore how we wear this beautiful and confusing mantle of manhood in the 21st century. Look, I get it. In public life, a lot of men are knuckleheads. But in private life, we can be thoughtful and we can be reflective if we have the right conversation, if we feel comfortable talking about our story. And we all have a great story to tell. And we can all learn from those stories. We can learn about who we've been, who we are, and who we want to be. And that's why we're going to have this conversation, so we can learn from other men just like us. That's why I'm so excited to have this conversation with my friend Tom. I think of this as a golden state of being with him. He has this aura around him, so serene and calm. Maybe it came from his growing up in this almost idyllic California sun. Maybe it came with his approach to life and easing into how he would begin his career. Or maybe it's just how he looks at the world with an open heart and a smile and the sense of sunshine that seems to be all around him. It's fascinating. He's an interesting man. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Welcome in to Menfolk Journeys. Well, Tom Desmarais, welcome in.
It's good to be here. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm doing great. It's so great to have this conversation with you. I've been looking forward to it for a long time. So why don't we get started and go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, my name is Tom Desmarais. Middle name is Ashley. It's a family name.
Roger.
I'm 75 years old. And I've been married to my wife now this is our 49th year as a married
couple.
We have 2 children and 7 grandchildren. And I was born in San Francisco and grew up in the Bay Area, in Saratoga, a city between San Jose and Santa Cruz.
Mm-hmm.
And I moved to San Diego in 1969 to attend San Diego State University. And this is my home. I've been here ever since. We live in Escondido now. We've lived in Escondido now since 1986.
Wow. So you are a total California guy. I think one of the tentative titles for this episode is The Golden Man in the Golden State. You're a native Californian, right? So you grew up in the 50s and in the 60s in California, and it seems like this was this golden age of boyhood, right? For surfing and being in the sun and almost endless possibilities. And Tom, the whole world looks at California in the 1950s and 60s and sees this glowing aura coming out of the state, right? Creating happiness and joy and love and suntan skin and golden hair and surfing and, swimsuits and all this stuff. It's so iconic. So I have a question then. Did it live up to the hype?
Well, at the time, it was just a boyhood to me. I mean, I didn't know anything else.
Right.
But yeah, looking back on it, it was a great time. I have 3 brothers and a sister, and our home in Saratoga was on a creek. And so we spent a lot of time outside. Sometimes the creek would be full of water and we could play in it and swim in it and hike. Yeah, it was a pretty idyllic looking back on it. It was a great life. surfing. I grew up swimming competitively at the
Mhm.
pool next door,
Okay.
and still love the water, as you know, Chris.
Yeah, that's true. Just
Um,
as a note to listeners, Thomas is an incredible ocean swimmer. At 75, he's still kicking everybody's ass. So still
well,
doing it.
that's kind of you to say, but yeah, I certainly miss the ocean. I've been swimming in a pool over the winter, and
Ugh.
it's not the same at all. But anyway, yeah. So I grew up, and in high school started surfing in Santa Cruz, where the water is very cold.
Hmm.
But as a teenager, cold doesn't really settle in too much, and it just adds to the excitement, I guess. And
Yeah,
in the,
and it's a funny thing. I read somewhere that for those folks born after World War II in the 50s and 60s, for this cohort, especially of Caucasian men born after the war in the United States, is statistically the luckiest cohort in the history of the world. It was an economic boom. It was a time when America in itself was relatively untouched by war. We didn't get touched by poverty or destruction, and in California, and especially, the war impact seemed to be prosperity and jobs. And you could argue that if America at that time was one of the blessed places to be born into and grow up, that California was like the most best blessed place in America to grow up at that time, right? I talked about kind of California being an icon, and I know it was just a boyhood to you, um, and I would imagine though, because it's all you knew, you did take it for granted because it was the only boyhood you knew.
well, exactly. I mean, it was a middle class upbringing. We lived in a suburban neighborhood. Um, so again, we had a lot of open space around us. At least that gradually filled in, and so we could play forever. I mean, I'd be out in the summer anyway. I'd be out in the morning and come back at night. And my parents took good care of us all. It was a lot of work on my mother. I didn't realize at the time how much work it was for her. We helped out as much as we could. I was I was really blessed that both of my grandmothers were actually roommates in
Huh.
about 5 miles from us, and we saw them all the time. And they told us wonderful stories of growing up in the late 19th century and of their families, their parents who grew up in the middle of the 19th century. And yeah, yeah, I have to say again, looking back on it, it was wonderful.
Yeah, it was.
And we were very fortunate.
Yeah, very fortunate, and it seems like that was a not just a safety net, but you were surrounded by, I would say protection almost, but maybe that was it. Maybe that was this protected, idyllic childhood growing up where multi generational stories were part of the fabric of the family discussion,
Hmm.
right?
Oh yeah, and my my uncle and aunt lived not too far away, um, and I have to say that life was somewhat easy because the cost of living wasn't as extreme as it is today. We weren't we were able to do a lot of things that today are perhaps frowned upon as too risky
Hmm.
in opening you up to liability. I mean, there was a lot more freedom in that sense. My my
Mm-hmm.
my children say to me, especially my son, that he wishes he could have grown up during the period of time that I was coming of age.
Uh-huh.
Because of the freedom that we had relative to
Sure.
today, even here in California.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that because I think people do look at that time as this idyllic time, especially for you and your family, right? I don't think you could understate that, and of course you don't realize it until you look back. But I- it must be harder now, and we'll get to this later when we talk about
Mhm.
your grandfatherhood and your vision of that. But even having conversations with your children and then of course your grandchildren, trying to describe for them what it was like in that period, because words that come to mind to me are like safety, security, freedom, um, almost and it's not just a freedom of movement, Tom, but, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but maybe it's like a freedom from a worry.
Yeah, I have to say that I didn't worry. I was too busy playing and having adventures and so forth. My parents did a wonderful job keeping us safe, let's say, and surrounding us with a larger family circle. I mentioned my uncle and aunt and their children. We were really close. We always got together at least twice a month for family gatherings, and I learned a lot from my uncle as I did from my own parents and my grandparents.
You know, that's when you say the sense that your parents, protected you and kind of gave you this space, and then you said you had a lot of play in your childhood. I think that's what everyone wants for their children, isn't it? Doesn't everybody want their children just to have this free play and have a sense of responsibility? But man, you got your whole life to work. You only have a small pocket of time to play.
Exactly. Right. And looking back on it, it wasn't long enough. That period of being able to play. Yeah.
Right. So let's talk about this then. When you came down to San Diego in 1969, again, my eyes start glazing over at what that must have been like in San Diego, where, it wasn't too big. It wasn't LA. Not too many people knew about it, but man, you were right there on Pacific Beach and Mission Beach and in the SDSU. And oh my gosh, that must have been an incredible experience.
Well, yeah. And I was living in my Volkswagen van too for a while.
Yes.
It was, I came down with friends. It was a safari, as we call it, right? We wanted warm water and beach breaks. We were tired of that cold water in Santa Cruz and all those point breaks with big waves with heavy, cold, dense water. And, in San Diego. So you have to think of this. I-5 had just opened like 2 or 3 years earlier. So before that, there was no I-5. So, and the population of San Diego was much less than it is today. And there was no traffic on the I-5 any time of day. I mean, it was a big freeway. And it's very different from today. I drove home today from the museum on I-15, and it was pretty packed. Right. I-15 wasn't here at that time. San Diego State, actually, when I started there, it was called San Diego State College. It didn't become San Diego State University until 1972 when I graduated. But,
oh my gosh, I didn't know that. So did you drive down with your friends from Santa Cruz to San Diego State? That must have been such a beautiful drive.
We drove down, of course, stopping all the way at different towns and so forth, and beach breaks and point breaks, and living out of our cars. It was just what we did. And I finally got an apartment in Pacific Beach on Oliver Street, I think it's called. $100 a month for a studio apartment.
And you could walk to the beach?
I could walk to the beach, and I could hitchhike to San Diego State.
Is that what you did?
This was the 60s. You could hitchhike all over the place. In fact, I eventually moved to Cardiff by the Sea, which is much better than Pacific Beach. And I would hitchhike to San Diego State from Cardiff every day to the university and back. No problem. You just had on the back of my binder, I just wrote PB, and on the other side it said SDSU or SDSC at the time, and I could just get a ride. Yeah.
That is unbelievable. I can't even imagine that now. So I got to ask, just tell me describe for me a day surfing at Pacific Beach in freaking 1969. You're 18, 19 years old, head full of hair, body full of muscles, sun's glowing. Talk to me about one of those moments.
Well, of course, the breaks weren't as nearly as crowded as they are today. You paddle out into the lineup, and today there's just all these people jockeying for position and giving you grief. It was much more chill at the time. I mean, there were locals that felt that this was their spot, and you had to respect them. But yeah, you just sit out in the lineup, wait for a wave, ride it into shore, paddle back out, repeat. Get tired, go in, fall asleep on the sand, for a nap. Wake up, shake the sand off, go back out again. That first summer and then the next summer, I mean, my hair was black normally, but I was blonde after moving to San Diego and spending all that time in the sun. And I'm paying for it now in terms of skin cancer. And I wasn't trying to get tan. I just was tired and I didn't have anything to cover up with. So I just fell asleep on the beach.
Yeah. Well, and sunscreen wasn't a thing back then, and it is something. I like to surf as well. And there's a moment, and I'd love you to describe your moment too. But when I surf, for the listeners out there, I surf a longboard. It's 998. It's like a Cadillac, right? I'm not a great surfer, but it can catch a wave pretty easily. And there's a moment where you're paddling and you feel the wave, and you look at behind you and you see the wave coming, and it's yours, and you're paddling to try to get into it, to build up your speed to match that wave, and then you feel the wave lift the back of your surfboard up, and you caught it because the front of your surfboard hits the first part of that lip of the wave, the face of the wave, and you've caught it because your weight goes down and you tilt the board in and you're on it. And then you stand up and the wave just pushes you along, and you go along the face of that wave for as long as you can. And however long it is, once you're done, there's nothing like it because the whole world goes away. You're in that moment at that time, feeling and catching the wave, and you're super present about what you're doing, riding on that face on a board that doesn't have wheels, and nature is pushing you forward. And as soon as you're done, and I just want to do it again. Like the adrenaline and the rush swells up in me, and the energy courses around. I'm like, I got to do that again. It's like the only time in my life where I feel completely addicted to a sensation.
Yeah, and doing that for a full day, and then the next day, and then the next day, and it's wonderful exercise. And I mean, the times that are most memorable for me are this is after I'd moved to Cardiff, and we were surfing. We would surf at Pipes mostly at the north end of San Alejo State Beach, and surfing in the late afternoon, watch the sunset, continue to surf. And you've been on that break for hours, so you know what to expect, and to continue surfing in the dark, knowing the wave, and of course you can see when the wave breaks the whitewater. But then it's just the only real sensation is motion because you can't really see much, and but it's I don't know, it's just kind of magical that surfing all day and then into dusk and then into the darkness. And especially with friends, and then you're just laughing your asses off out there because it's in the dark, man. But it's still good. It's still good, and the waves; they're part of you at that point. Yeah,
they're part of you. I love that, Tom. I have to believe, and it's again a theory I can't prove. Man, I gotta think that does really good things for your brain in terms of a sensibility, a relaxation, a perspective of the world. Do you think that surfing and what it did in terms of stabilizing you and either calming you or giving you a balanced perspective, do you think that that's a true thing? And if so, Do you think that really has carried through your whole life?
I don't know. We all have our gifts, right? Each of us has our own gifts, and I don't know that surfing's for everyone. So, but for me, yeah, it's a. And unfortunately, I don't surf anymore. I got
Sure.
tired of the crowds, and I have surf knots on my rib cage, and it's just so painful after I surf. So I just can't do it. I've got 2 boards, but I try every now and then to surf, but it doesn't last. But anyway, getting back to the point, it just fit me. It just fit who I was and made me, because I love the water,
Mm-hmm.
especially salt water.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, when you're out in the lineup and maybe it's a flat day. There's not much to do, and there's so much other things you can do playing in the water.
Mm-hmm.
Dive off your board, push it down and shoot it up in the air as high as you can, and it's just part of that whole being able to immerse yourself in the ocean and feel the power of the ocean.
Right.
And the fact that power can be transmitted to your board and to you, and you can ride that thing, and yeah. And on big days, there's nothing like paddling out and just getting pummeled, and you take a couple of feet forward and a couple of feet back with every wave, but you just keep turning turtle and going under, and eventually you get outside and you're exhausted, but you're laughing your ass off because all that power, man, it's just trying to stop you, and it's you're just not going to let it happen. But anyway.
There is a power to it, and I think that when you can take a walk in the woods and you can go on a trail, and a buddy of mine hikes on Camelback Mountain in Arizona, and he's like, if you're not careful with your water, your time, you could slip and die, and you have to respect the mountain. And I get that, but there's something different about ocean, and about, you said, that power of that wave is just so much more than you.
Well, yeah, and the thing is, you can be on a big wave and wipe out. And you're not going to, unless you hit the bottom, you're not going to get hurt, or unless this board hits you. But yeah, I mean, you can fall, 5 feet and just dive underwater. And of course, when I started surfing, we didn't have leashes, so there was a lot of swimming in to get your board.
Of course, there was. I it's interesting because you're one of the. I'll pay you a compliment a little bit later. But you're one of the calmest men that I've ever known. And I wonder if those years of an idyllic childhood and years of that calming, balancy type of adrenaline joy from surfing baked into your mind this state of being.
I don't know. That's a good question. I think it could be genetics too. My maternal grandmother was very calm.
Mm-hmm. Maybe it's a little bit of both. I'd like to believe it's a little bit of both, because the one thing that I know about salt water is it gets into your bloodstream one way or another. You're drinking it, it's coming in up your nose, it's coming up your arse, it's going everywhere through you. And, there's seal poop and bird crap and biomass and all this stuff. And I have to believe that stuff mixes in your brain. And there's a primal energy to salt water of the ocean and all the minerals being inside of your body that I have to believe that it's good for you.
Oh yeah. I mean, your skin smells so much better when you come out of the ocean than if you take a shower, right? I mean, it's just it's remarkable. No, I agree. That's awesome. People, I don't know what that's called, but they take syringes and flush their noses with salt water. But every time we swim, we do that naturally.
Naturally. Awesome. We'll be right back. All right. So, Thomas, the golden boy of San Diego State College in 1969. You study paleontology. Is that right?
Well, I do now, but
Well, tell me about what you studied in San Diego State
so
College in 1969.
well, let me just back up. Before I went to San Diego State, before I drove down to San Diego or moved to San Diego, I was attending community colleges up in the San Jose area, and I was a photography major, fine art photography, and but I had taken a geology class in as part of my electives, and it was like, wow, the Earth has a history, and I can participate in understanding that history. And surfing at Santa Cruz, most of the breaks you have to climb down cliffs with your surfboards, and to get to the break. But if you turn around and look at the cliff, it's got stratified deposits. It's the pages of the Earth history preserved in the rock face, and so there was a kind of a natural affinity for me. But when I moved to San Diego and was attending San Diego State, the photography courses were all industrial photography, and I could care less about that. and I thought, what can my major be? I took a geology class. I'm going to be a geology major. Let's do this, Tom.
That's awesome.
Just that way.
Interesting. It was just that way. Before you get to that, just that simple, because I think you nailed it for me. You were looking at fine art photography. You have an artist's sensibility of looking at the world, and you just said something remarkably poetic. When you went down to the ocean, you saw the cliff. It was the chapters of the Earth's book.
Mm-hmm.
That is, Tom, that's not a scientific way of looking at that. That is a loving, respectful way and a poetic way of thinking about the Earth, telling us its own story.
Mm-hmm.
Marvelous.
So anyway, I became a geology major overnight.
Yes.
And I dove into it. I had been a so-so student, but I mean I was focused, and I stayed at school as long as I could. Because man, I'm living in my van at San Diego State. I had some friends that helped me get into the dorm cafeteria to eat. Otherwise, I was cooking on my Coleman stove, eating rice.
Oh, that is awesome. Where did you park?
It was on Hardy Street, yeah. But I only did that for a couple of months until I got a place. But anyway, so I was a geology student all of a sudden, and so for 3 years I went to San Diego State in the geology department, and in that, so I had moved out of my van and into a studio apartment in Pacific Beach, and then I moved up to Cardiff by the Sea. And was sleeping on the beach, and a high school friend of mine, how random is this, from Saratoga, from the San Jose area, saw me on the beach and said, we have a place here. We're looking for a roommate. Do you want to move in with us? So I moved in and lived in Cardiff.
Wonderful.
And that's where I met my wife. And we eventually moved in together. But I also acquired this wonderful dog, Toby. He was a Malamute Shepherd mix, and he was probably a year old, and his owner was just treating him like crap. And Toby and I became just really tight. And he used to hitchhike with me to San Diego State every day. And again, this is the late 60s, early 70s. Dogs on campus. Toby never needed a leash, the smartest dog ever. He'd go to class with me and lay there, and go to the next class with me and lay there. And then we'd hitchhike home. And sometimes I'd drive. But, I mean, it was pretty awesome. Yeah, Toby.
That that is awesome. I You must right now look back on that and think about how remarkable and special that is.
Well, I still dream about Toby, and
Hmm.
I've had a number of dogs since then, but I still have Toby's in my dreams, and I still dream about my Volkswagen van. It was a '59 panel van, not windows, and I had fixed it up inside, made a made it comfortable. So
Yeah.
yeah, those were good times. Obviously, since I still dream about those times, and I wake up
Right.
wishing I still had that van, and obviously Toby.
Yeah, isn't that interesting, Tom, that you still dream about those moments where,
Mhm.
at the time you were just living life and it's kind of what you knew, but must have been a part of you, clearly there was a part of you and part of your brain that locked in these moments that were so important. Like this is a beautiful moment, right? I'm not a brain scientist by any means, but I do know that physiologically the amygdala and the hippocampus is located in the kind of in that limbic center of the brain, kind of that deep part of the brain. And that's biologically where our emotion and long-term memory live. And they're
Mm.
physiologically right next to one another. They're touching they're one another. That's why everybody remembers their first meaningful kiss, right? Because there was this emotion and this memory that in that moment. I have to think that your mind and your body and your presence was like, oh my God, this is 1969, 1970. I'm at Cardiff. I'm hitchhiking with my dog, not on a leash, going to college, learning about shite that I love. And I'm hitchhiking back and I'm going to go surf before I go to sleep. I don't know how life is going to get better than this.
No, it's true. It was it was
Your mind
awesome.
just was like, I'm locking this in. And I remember that this was part of my journey. This was part of my life. It's
Yeah.
beautiful.
So when my wife and I moved in together, eventually in Cardiff, um, we lived in this beach bungalow with on Cambridge Avenue with a 180-degree view of the ocean view, and we had chickens and a garden, and we paid $100 a month for this 600 square foot. Yeah, I mean it was just friggin' awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is fantastic. So you study geology, something that you love, but you study it in a way which I believe, like I said, comes from almost the heart of a poet, looking at the secrets, not the secrets, well, maybe the secrets that the earth reveals to us,
Mm-hmm.
through her legacy, right? Through the rock and the impressions that there is. Um, After you graduate, did you immediately begin working?
Um, I did. I worked for a publisher in Del Mar that was working on a geology textbook,
Hmm.
and so I got a job there as helping to write biographies of contributors to the book. I got to read about and consolidate and compose a concise biography for these different authors in the book, and in the process, learning about their journey, so to speak, their academic journey. Did
Mm-hmm.
that for a while, and then until the book was published, and then I got a job at a company that did consulting, micropaleontology, looking at tiny microfossils, marine microfossils that are found in ocean sediments, and that help to help oil companies find oil and subsurface deposits
Hmm.
because they're distinct organisms at distinct layers, and you can compare layer to layer across an area, and then you can understand the structure underground. Oil tends to be trapped in domes where the rocks have been folded, and by looking at the microfossils in a variety of different holes drilled in that area, you can get a picture of the subsurface geology. And so I did that for a number of years, and the company actually put me through graduate school at USC.
Wow.
And so I would drive up to graduate school with Toby. And so
Nice.
Toby had a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in geology.
Go, Toby.
And we would sleep in by then it was a Volkswagen bus, and that I converted. So we'd go up there and sleep up there. And so I worked at that job for a while, and my wife got a job there as well. And we saved a bunch of money. And but it was all everything that we did, everything we learned about the history of these subsurface deposits, both the evolutionary changes in the organisms, but also the rocks themselves. Everything was proprietary. Everything was a secret, which is kind of the opposite of what science should be. The discoveries should be published and help build on the body of knowledge about the history, in this case, the history of the planet. And so I quit.
Sure. Yeah, it makes sense because it wasn't, I think that up until that point, you were living a life that was in complete alignment with what you loved. I mean, just the story that you tell, you did everything that you loved and you loved everything that you did. And finally, you were confronted with a place where you were like, this isn't actually what I love. And I don't want to do something that I don't love because, gosh, I'm not even used to that. I'm not even used to doing something that I don't love. And also, too, I love your idea of kind of doing those building the record of science and the record of history. I talked with another, our mutual friend, Scott, who's a scientist, and he, in a different field, he said he's focusing on the building blocks of science. As you started to move into your scientific career, did that become more important to you?
Yeah. I mean, again, we are discovering things about the past in geology and paleontology. And scientists have been doing that for a couple hundred years now. And together we've developed an understanding of, again, the history of the planet, both the physical history and the biological history of the planet. And to be able to contribute to that body of knowledge is a thrill, let's just say.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
So when I left that company, I looked around, what can I do? I said, well, there's a natural history museum in San Diego. I'm going to go volunteer there and see what they do with paleontology. And so in 1970, early 79, I started volunteering in the paleontology department at the museum.
Wow.
And 6 months later, I was able to get a little bit of funding for that. I was making $4.50 an hour.
Yes, sir. Bring it.
Working part-time. and either driving from Cardiff or taking the bus.
You stepped up. No longer hitchhiking. Yes. Look at you moving up in the world.
Hitchhiking into San Diego City wasn't as easy as hitchhiking to a university. So eventually one thing led to another, and I was able to get a permanent position there. And this is later in this month will be my 45th year at the museum.
Dude, congratulations. 45 years. 45 That's like winning the lottery. Paleontologist, geologist working at San Diego Natural History Museum for 45 years. Literally your whole adulthood.
Yes, and the other exciting thing is that our museum is run and operated by the San Diego Society of Natural History, which is a private, not-for-profit organization. That in October of this year, we'll be celebrating our 150th anniversary as an organization.
That's fantastic. Good for San Diego for starting that early. So I've got to ask, as a paleontologist, I know that there's excavations and not excavations, I should say, there's construction, right? We're building roads, we're digging up stuff. Sometimes that reveals stuff, right? And you need to call in a geologist, paleontologist for excavations and the like. Can you tell us some of the really cool, emergency digs that you had? It's kind of like calling Ghostbusters. It's like, oh my gosh, we think this is a fossil. Who do we call? Tom.
We've been collecting fossils in construction settings at the museum now for almost as long as I've been there. And it's primarily regulated by the California Environmental Quality Act that requires mitigation of impacts to various aspects of the environment, which including paleontology. So there is regulation that kind of drives this. So we're on site actually during the construction as part of the construction team. Although we're not driving a bulldozer, we're on the side of it looking for fossils that are being unearthed and to get them out of the way before they're destroyed.
Wow.
So over the years, we have collected some fantastic fossils, I'll tell you.
Like what?
For some reason, the first one that comes to mind is down in the East Village. This was almost 10 years ago now. Maybe it has been 10 years. I lose track of time. I know that seems weird.
And the East Village, so our listeners know, that's where Petco Park is, kind of the baseball park in downtown San Diego. So it's really the heart of downtown. So
they were the Thomas Jefferson School of Law was building their new building down there, the campus. And they went down 40 feet into the subsurface. And at 20 feet, we discovered the partial skeleton of a Columbian mammoth. And it was sitting on a layer that had a lot of seashells in it. And then that was sitting on a layer that had river sandstones with horse fossils in it, mostly teeth and limb bones. And then that was sitting on a layer that had a mud layer that had shells of estuarine snails. And then that was sitting on a sandstone that had the skeleton of a gray whale in it. And this is all in the footprint of this construction site. And the tusk on the mammoth, we have one complete tusk. It's 10 feet long. And just enormous animal. And the skull's on display at the museum on the third floor. So that was remarkable.
So first of all, what was it like for you it's almost like if you're a panhandler looking for gold and you finally found it. What was it like for you to actually see that stuff in the earth?
Well, I mean, that is the real excitement, to be in the field and see an object that you think, well, this is a fossil, but it's mostly hidden, right? It's still covered with sediment. And to start cleaning it, because you're unsure what it is, right? So it's just, let's say, a portion of it. And you start uncovering it, and your mind's going, so this is this. And you're trying to, first you figure out what kind of bone it is or shell. And so if it's a bone, is this an arm bone? Is it a leg bone? Is it a wrist bone? Is it a neck bone? And so you're looking for the clues, the morphologic clues that tell you what it is. And then you figure out, okay, this is the part of a skull, in this case of a large animal, and then we find the teeth, and the teeth are very distinctive on mammoths. So it's a mammoth. So you're looking at part of it exposed, and then you realize, well, this is the skull. The other side should have the other tooth, molar, and the front of the skull should be here to the left, and the back of the skull. So now you have a picture in your mind, but it's still covered with sediment, and then you uncover it, and hopefully you were right in terms of where you estimate the specimen is going to be. And then you realize, in this case, this fossil has been underground for maybe 500,000 years, out of sight, and we're the first people to see it. And we're looking at a scene that formed 500,000 years ago and has been covered all this time, and we're unearthing it, trying to piece together, first of all, what's the organism? And then how did it come to be in this position? It's kind of like a crime scene. with the body here and the shell casings over there and the blood spatter and tire marks or whatever, So you're piecing together all the various scenes or the aspects of this prehistoric quote crime scene, and that's thrilling. And then finding other fossils that are in that same layer or in overlying and underlying layers. That because in a sequence of layered rocks, the older rocks are at the bottom of the sequence, and the younger rocks are at the top. So you got a temporal sequence. So as you look at the organisms and rocks from one layer to another, you can get a sense of change over time. So again, in that one little area, you can piece together a historical record. And in the case of downtown, we can see changes in sea level, flooding, withdrawal of sea, flooding, withdrawal of the sea. And,
wow!
All within this 40-foot thick sequence of stratified deposits in the East Village of San Diego.
And you see the gray whale at the bottom. Tom, it goes back to your first poetic phrase of going down to Santa Cruz, walking down the steps and seeing the chapters of the Earth's history, right? Not only did you see the chapters of the Earth's history, but you saw chapters unfold in the history of life in the Earth. Mm-hmm. Gray whale, fossils, bone, a mammoth at 500,000 years, the new kid on the block. It's amazing that that you can see all of this story.
Yeah, and it's a real privilege to be able to participate in that exploration and then to summarize it. And
it's a story of a place, and you're there to help write it. It's marvelous.
Right, and then you look at that, and there's the local setting, but then the regional context, and maybe then the continental context of these fossils, and what it tells us about changes in the planet over time and space. And the arrival of mammoths here in North America at 1.5 million years ago, and it's a story that's told from other parts of the continent, and then we can add to that as to what the eventual distribution of mammoths, for instance, and the fact that we find mammoths in North America up until about 11, 12,000 years ago, and it's like, God, they almost made it.
Right.
They almost made it. Just think how great it would be to have, a 14-foot tall lumbering proboscidean walking down the street,
That'd be awesome. They'd be in the wild animal park now. That's amazing. Yeah. What a great story. We'll be right back. So Thomas, it's amazing that you say you're a participant in the story of the generations of the Earth, and I have to think about the story you told earlier when you were growing up. You had this beautiful environment of family, of multi-generational family. Your grandmothers who lived together being near you, your aunts and uncles being close, a lot of siblings, and now you, like you mentioned, are not just father, but your grandfather. And so you now are at the top of the multi-generational family, as it were. And I'm curious to kind of talk about and have you kind of talk about not just your sonhood and what you learned from your dad and the family structure that he and your mom made for you, but now your fatherhood and then your grandfatherhood, right? I think that I guess I'll start off with the first question. Did you always think you would have a family like you had growing up?
I never thought about it. It was just a natural thing for my wife and I when we were able to settle and buy our first house. We looked at each other. let's have kids. Something like that. I don't know if it was that
Something like that.
ninth or
She was like, "Are you done hitchhiking?" And you're like, "Yeah, I guess I'm done hitchhiking. Sure,
well,
that's
you know, and we'd been practicing enough that it was time to
fine."
to,
That's how
you
it
know
should be. That's
to
exactly how it
concede,
should
right?
be. So again, how many children do you have?
Two.
Two children, and then
I have a boy and a girl.
great, and then and grandchildren. Now, did you have a? I mean, you go through. I mean, as a parent, I know you go through your whole parental life, and it's just kind of swimming through it, right? Suddenly everyone's in routine. The kids go to school, you go to job, everyone does their work, they come back, you eat dinner, and you kind of rinse and repeat over the decades until your children are launched through. Um, but I guess I'll ask you then, as your kids got older and they left the house, and you were kind of moving on that next stage. Did you have a vision of what grandfatherhood would be like?
Well, again, I didn't really think about it.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love being a father. I had so much fun
Mm-hmm.
play. I mean, I played with my kids. Unfortunately,
Sure.
my wife did a lot more work, but um, we were fortunate enough that she could be a stay-at-home mom, and that was her
Mm-hmm.
choice until the kids got older. And then she wanted to become. She wanted a career, and she became a school nurse. But I loved playing with my kids. We had a lot of fun.
Yeah, I bet you did. Well, you were a playful child,
I was, and I
and
hope
to
I'm
it,
still a playful old man. But
you are.
uh,
The only qualification I would say is you're a playful older man, because to me, you're not old at all. I think you have one of the youngest, most boyish souls of anyone that I know, and I'm grateful for it. And I think that your growing up in play and your belief in play and your love of play that continued through your young adulthood has actually helped make you the man that you are.
well, that sounds good. I'll take that. But I think it probably also helps keep you young at heart, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So now that you're a grandfather, talk to me about what either you're teaching your grandchildren or what you're learning from your grandchildren.
Well, that's a complex question because there's so many things to learn. I teach my grandchildren, the older ones, because we have a 9-month-old
Wow.
who's so much fun. But that's a different sort of play and a different sort of learning. There, I'm learning more from her about what I've forgotten. But anyway, for the older kids, um, teaching them to be kind,
Mm.
you know, teaching them to be confident, that they can do things. Um, I guess going with kindness is being respectful of others, but teaching them that it's okay to make a mistake, but admit that you made a mistake and move on.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. That not every day is a good day, too.
Right. Right. And it's okay that not every day is a good day.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, do your children look at you differently because you're a grandfather and not just a father?
I think you'd have to ask them that. I mean, because my son has moved out of state, unfortunately, but my daughter's right here in Escondido. So we see her family a lot more, and
Mm-hmm.
um, we're great babysitters.
Yes.
my wife and I, especially my wife, but I don't know where. So I mean, I think she's happy that my daughter and her husband are happy that her kids get to have a different style of parenting when they're with the grandparents.
Sure. It's a different way. I think that that's one of the huge benefits of having an extended family around, because when you're a child, the primary adult, of course, is your parents. And you're wondering if that's the only adult that exists and it's the only way to be an adult. I think that a lot has been talked about and written about and thought about the precious relationships that children can have with uncles or aunts or grandparents, where it's still family, but it's not their parents. And it's a different perspective and different stories and different way of living. And they get to see their own, I think, again, it's another theory I can't prove. I have a lot of those theories I can't prove, but it also helps kids see their parents, not just as parents, but as people in their own right.
Yeah, and that's something that comes with age, that you eventually see your parents as not perfect, right? That they have, they're flawed, like we all are. Yeah, I know. In my own case, I learned from my father certain things, and I learned from my uncle certain things, and they were really quite different.
Oh, that's
but
interesting.
I think together it was very useful, and I learned a lot from my grandmothers. I think.
What is one thing you think you learned from your uncle, father, or grandmother that has carried to you that you think you might be teaching your son or your grandchildren?
Well, one thing, maybe it's not an important thing, but my father liked to work in the yard and did things that most people would hire a contractor to do. And he did them well. And the idea being, well, I mean, I can do this. You can do this stuff. It looks hard when you think about it, but if you plan for it and are methodical, you can build a patio, you can build a deck, you can build steps down to the creek. I mean, all this, so that's something that I've imparted to my kids too, that they're capable of doing that stuff. They just have to learn it, but they have the skill set to accomplish things like that.
I would say and push back, because you said at the beginning of that wasn't that important. I don't think that it's unimportant at all. I think it's very important. I think that the lessons of either the reliance or the sense that you can build things yourself, and it's not just the act of, oh, I can do something. It's the act of, I can think of something and create something out of nothing, and I don't have to hire to do that. I could actually do that. And you know what? You can too.
Right. And then when it's done, you say, to quote Tom Hanks, look what I have done, right?
That's right. Look what I have done. And I look back at your life, Tom, and I mentioned I was going to give you a compliment, and I hope that you receive this with the grace that I'm sure you will. But you are a model of manhood to me. When I look around and see men who I want to be, you are that guy. You are the most successful man I've ever met in my whole life, in terms of how I deem to be a successful man. In terms of your
really
kindness,
touching.
That's true. In terms of your kindness and your character, your ability to hold a family together and pursue a vocation, not just a job, but a vocation where, a vocation is kind of defined as something that is particularly worthy and requiring great dedication. And you've done that. It's so rare for someone to find that. And you've done all of that in all areas of life. I think that you are, like I said, the most successful man I've ever met. And it's such an honor for me to talk to you and to be your friend.
Well, thank you, Chris. That means a lot to me, really.
Well, it comes from the heart. Now, I have one final question for you. Who is someone that you know that I don't know that I should meet?
Wow. You can see the hard drive spinning. Well, unfortunately, he passed away 2 years ago. But
Well, tell me about him.
so somebody I worked with for 40 years. Um, Probably the most generous person I've ever met.
Hmm.
I don't know. It's hard to talk about, I guess, for some reason.
You don't have to. But I appreciate that you thought of him and me
Yeah.
as a generous person, because you're a generous person. And
like this
as you
guy.
know, I have a heart full of love for you. You know I love you.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'm sorry I'm at the end, but
You're fine.
I still have chlorinated water coming out of my nose today.
You are perfect and you're wonderful. All right, Tom, we'll sign off then. I hope you have a wonderful night.
Yeah, thanks. This was great, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye now.
Wow. Well, that really ended in a touching way, and he has such a huge heart, my friend Tom. And I'm so grateful that he was able to share his story with all of us. A golden state of being, my friend Tom Demarais. Right? Golden state, of course, is California, but a golden state of understanding how freedom and playfulness as a child can create a whole way of looking at the world. He has such an open mind. And when I think about his idyllic growing up in the California sun, amidst the love of family, the sense of confidence, a sense of freedom, and freedom in a way that was worry-free, which means he could be playful and enjoy who he wanted to be, and that set him on his course for his life. So what did we learn from Tom? We learned from Tom that when you're young, if you can play and you have that open sensibility, the world reveals itself to you in some beautiful ways. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. I hope you enjoy this podcast. I'd love to have you as a guest. You can go to menfolkjourneys.com, and there you can find a conversation start, and you can also book a conversation, because I know you have a great story to tell. And when you can tell your story and you feel comfortable telling your story, you'll learn more about yourself, and more importantly, we learn more about you, and we learn more about ourselves too. Because in sharing our stories, I think we can all get better together and be a little bit better to each other. You know, and isn't that the point of it all? I wish you well, and I wish you well in how you wear this beautiful mantle of manhood. Word bit Falarid.